Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Aleph, and we will be learning today, Mitzvah Hashem, Daf Chav Ches Amud Beis. We are continuing to learn Hilchis Tzitzis, and I hope that today we will, Mitzvah Hashem, begin and conclude Siman Tezayin, which speaks about the proper size of a beged chayiv in tzitzits. So, for our purposes, this would be the size of our talis katan. So, we begin on Chav Ches Amud Aleph. Bottom line, Siman Tezayin, Shir Talis, the proper size of a talis, Ubay Sif Echad, and here we have one sif. Says the Mechaber, Shir Talis Shechayiv B'tzitzitz, the measurement of a talis, a beged, that's chayiv in tzitzitz. What is that measurement? Sheyiskase ba, it's a beged that you can cover yourself with, ba'erich in its length, u'baroichav, and with its width, roishai verubai, the head and the majority of the body, shel katan, of a child. Of a child, what age? A child, turn the page to Chav Ches Amud Beis, hamishalech levadoi bashuk, a child who is permitted to go on his own in the street, in the marketplace. It's brought down, this means a child who has the necessary street smarts that you would allow him to go out into the marketplace and purchase something and sell something on his own. And he doesn't need somebody else to watch him. So, interesting way of phrasing it, but what has the Mechaber told us? Says the Mechaber, how do we measure the proper size of a talis, of a beged that's chayiv in tzitzitz? It's a beged that is large enough so that a katan, a minor child, so we know we're talking about a child under the age of 13, a katan who is old enough to be permitted to go into the marketplace and do purchases and sales on his own, and he doesn't need somebody else watching him, a beged that is big enough that a child of that age can cover roishai verubai, his head and the majority of his body, in the length and the width of that garment. Okay, let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah here. Chav Ches Amud Aleph, Mishnah Berurah is katan aleph. Shel katan. All right, so like I said, the Mechaber gave us very interesting phraseology to describe the age of this katan. Says the Chavetz Chaim, V'hainu ben teisha shonim. We're talking about a child who's 9 years old. B'tshuvas ram mintz, over here it says in the parentheses Ramah, but it has been found that this is not a Chuvas Ramah, this is a Chuvas Ram Mintz. It looks like there was an error that crept into the typography. The word Ramah, I believe, was taken from a Magen Avram, where there was a typo and it said Chuvas Ramah. This is not a Chuvas Ramah, it's Chuvas Ram Mintz. Siman Kuf Yud Mefalpel, he discusses, Heyach Yoitzin Ba'arba Kanfei Saktanim Mizah The Chuvas Ram Mintz had a major problem. He said, the Mechaber gives us a description for the proper size of the talis, and yet, in his time, he said, we see that many people wear a talis katan that's far smaller than that size. And how are they being yotzei, the mitzvah, with this kind of beged? V'tayrev dvarav, and the conclusion of his words are, Demutav leilech bahem, that it is better to wear a talis katan that is not the proper size, that's too small. Mileilech kalayim b'li tzitzis. It's better to wear that than to go all day without wearing tzitzis. Apparently, this was a challenge. For some reason, either because of availability or difficulty, whatever it is, but the people had a challenge wearing a talis katan of the proper size, so they were wearing a talis katan that was too small. And the Ram Mintz says, no, it's better that they should do that than they should walk around without a beged of arba kanfos, without tzitzits. And in the Ramah, on the Torah, in the Darkei Moshe, Siman Ches, Kasav, he writes, that we should teach people, sheyavarchu ba'beiker al talis gadol, that they should make the bracha of lehisatef patzitzitz on the talis gadol when they come to shul, v'yifteru es hakatan, and with that bracha that they make on the talis gadol, which certainly is large enough to have a chiv of tzitzits, they should pater the talis katan that they're wearing with the bracha on the talis gadol. Why? Because the talis katan was too small. V'yelchu by kalayim, and they should still wear the talis katan all day. So the Ramah was not saying don't wear that talis katan that's too small. The Ramah said you're wearing a talis katan that's too small, so don't make a bracha on it. Make a bracha on the talis gadol, which is big enough. Use the bracha on the talis gadol to pater the talis katan, and wear the talis katan all day. That way you're walking around all day with a beged of dal kanfus with tzitzits. Nevertheless, if a person has the ability to make a talis katan that is the proper size, ma'toiv u'manoim, how good and how pleasant would that be? Ad kan l'shainai, that's the lashon of the Ramah in the Darkei Moshe. Now, if you look further in the Ramah, the Darkei Moshe, it's a very fascinating Ramah. And what's clear from the Ramah is that the Ramah does not say that somebody who makes a bracha on a talis katan that's too small is making a bracha of atala. What he says is, it's better that if you're wearing such a small talis katan, you should make the bracha on the talis gadol and pater the talis katan. And the truth is that the Rishiva Zatzal, Rav Moshe Zecher Tzaddik V'Kadosh L'Vracha, makes mention of this. He makes this diuk in a tshuva in the Igris. And he writes in the Igris, he says, take a look at the Ramah. Somebody wrote a shayla to the Rishiva Zatzal and asked him how it is that people aren't makpid on young children, that they should wear tzitzits of the proper size. Because you have a 10-year-old kid, you have an 11-year-old kid, you want to be mechadech him in mitzvahs, so l'chari you should give him a proper size talis katan. Now we're going to see that according to Rav Moshe, a proper size talis katan is, if you want to go with 3/4 of an amma, approximately 16, 17 inches, but you want to go by an amma al amma, you're talking 21.5, 22 inches. Those are big for a little kid. That's a very big talis katan. How are they going to put that under their shirt? How are they going to tuck it in? It's going to be hanging all over them. So you get the kid a small talis katan. So the shoyel wrote a tshuva to the Rishiva Zatzal and said, I don't understand. How are you yotzei chinuch with this? You're giving the kid a talis katan that's too small. And the Rishiva Zatzal writes back. It's a very fascinating tshuva. And he bases it on this Ramah. He says, if you take a look at this Ramah in the Darkei Moshe, the Ramah does not say that it's usher to make a bracha on a talis katan that's too small because it's a bracha of atala. He says they wear a talis katan that's too small. We should teach them that they should make the bracha on the talis gadol and they should pater the talis katan with the talis gadol. That's not, you would think that if it was a bracha of atala, the Darkei Moshe, the Ramah would scream. He would say, you're not allowed to make a bracha on it. It's a bracha of atala. Elamai, the Rishiva Zatzal says in the tshuva, it's not a bracha of atala. Since that became a beged that people wear, even though it doesn't seem to have this shear of achi iskase roisha v'rubai shel katan of a 9-year-old child, since it became the minig to wear that size beged, it's chayiv and tzitzits. Abel amaisa, it's only chayiv and tzitzits sort of based on a minig. And the Rishiva Zatzal, I'm paraphrasing, but he sort of writes in the tshuva, how did this minig happen? He said the minig happened because for whatever reason, it was difficult for people to wear a beged of the proper size. Either they couldn't attain such a beged, which is difficult to understand why they wouldn't be able to attain it, or I think he writes in the tshuva, machmas malachtam, because of their jobs, or maybe for environmental reasons, it was too difficult for them to wear a beged of the proper size. So what were they going to do? Go without tzitzits? I've screamed this from the rooftops already enough times, but maybe not enough times. But still, when I was a kid, there was no such a thing. You go without a beged al kanfus? You go without tzitzits? Nobody goes without tzitzits. Unfortunately, nowadays it's become kal by the younger generation, and I do see people sometimes going without tzitzits, which is shreklach. But you don't go without tzitzits. But they couldn't wear a tzitzits, a talis katan of the proper size, so they wore a small one. So the minig became that you're going to wear a small one because you can't go without beged al kanfus. Once that became the minig, the The Rishira Zatzal says you could do it and you can even make a bracha on it. But the Ramah says, still in all, it's better to make a bracha on the talis gadol. And because the talis gadol is bona fide chiyuv tzitzits. So make the bracha on the talis gadol and pater the talis katan. The Ramah, you can even see it, the Ramah, the way the Ramah writes it, the Ramah says, if they're going to make a bracha on the tzitzits, the Ramah says, on the talis katan, this is why it became a minig to make a bracha on the talis katan al mitzvahs tzitzits and not lehisatef patzitzits. You know why? Because since they're not really being mekayim the mitzvah kitikuna, they're not being mekayim the mitzvah the way it really is supposed to be mekoyim, because they're not really wearing a beged that's big enough. So instead of making a bracha asher kiddishanu b'mitzvaysav etzivanu lehisatef patzitzis, which sounds like a birchas hamitzvahs that I'm going right now to be mekayim the mitzvah, since they're not being mekayim the mitzvah kitikuna, instead they make a bracha asher kiddishanu b'mitzvaysav etzivanu al mitzvahs tzitzits, which is kind of like a birchas shevach v'hidah, that I'm thanking the Rebbeinu Shalom for giving the mitzvah of tzitzits to Klal Yisrael. Even though I'm not about to really be mekayim the mitzvah kitikuna, because I'm going to put on a talis katan that's too small, but I could still thank the Rebbeinu Shalom for giving azah mitzvah to Klal Yisrael. So the Rishira Zatzal says, you see from the way the Ramah is writing, clearly the Ramah was not ready to say that this is a bracha of Atala. It's not a bracha of Atala if it's too small. But still at all, we should be careful to have the proper size tzitzits, and that's why the Chavetz Chaim, the way he writes it, he says, Ma toiv u'manoim. He's quoting the Ramah, it's not his words. Ma toiv u'manoim. How good and how pleasant and how beautiful is it if we could have the proper size talis katan. Truth be told, now that I think back, I do remember when I was young, a lot of adults wearing very, very small talis katans. I don't know if this was a holdover from Europe, if this was an issue in Europe, but I remember adults wearing very, very small talis katan. And when we became yeshiva bacharim and this and that, and suddenly we started going out and getting these size 22s when we were I was this little scrawny yeshiva bachar that if I turned sideways you couldn't see me. And yet I went and I got a size 22 talis katan. It was like a chiddush. Who wears such a big talis katan? They wore very small talis katans. But that was the minute. And it's not a bracha l'vatala. Okay. Continues the Mishnah Berurah here on top line Chav Ches Amud Beis. V'yasak seifayim shel talis katan rechavim. The straps of the talis katan. What does that mean? What are the straps? Well, the talis katan has a front and a back, and it has a neck hole. And then it has these two pieces on the side that go on the shoulders. So says the Chavetz Chaim, V'yasak seifayim shel talis katan. The shoulder straps, they're not really straps, but the shoulder sections of the talis katan should be made rechavim. They should be made wide. Kedei shiyu nikarim, so that they should be recognizable. I'm teaching it literally. V'yi aleim teres beged, and that they should be considered a beged. V'loi shem ritzuos. They should not be straps. We don't want to have two straps that go on the shoulders that connect the front with the back. No. We want the ksefayim, we want the shoulder sections of the talis katan to be begodim. It should have teres beged on it. It should be large enough that it's choshev to be a beged. Now, there's a nice Dirshu footnote here. I know we haven't been doing a lot of Dirshu footnotes lately, but there is a very nice Dirshu footnote here, footnote number 2. Where does this come from? Says the footnote, Mikar Devarav, the source of the Chavetz Chaim's words over here are, Me'amachzis HaShekel, from the Machzis HaShekel, Shabir, who explains, Shamasha Kosav HaMa'aril. We have the Magen Avram brings down a Ma'aril that talks about the shoulder straps of the tzitzits. And the lashon of the Ma'aril is that the shoulder sections should be wide. Why? Deloilesi avira the high gisa, so that the airspace on this side and on that side of the shoulder section should not be able to come umevatale and cancel out the shoulder strap. Now, for those of us who learned Chelik Dalet together, when we were learning the halachas of Erevin, and we were learning all of the technicalities of mechitzos, that's where this lashon comes from. Leisi avira dahagisa umevatale. Sometimes by a mechitza, we have a rule that if we have a section of wall, and then on each side of it we have empty space, and there's more empty space than there is closed space, we say asi avira dahagisa. The airspace on this side comes together with the avira dahagisa, together with the avira, the airspace on the other side of this little piece of mechitza, umevatale, and it's mevatel the mechitza. So says the Ma'aril, quoted by the Magen Avraham, the shoulder pieces have to be substantial, because if the shoulder pieces are not substantial, then you know what happens? Leisi avira dahagisa, you have the airspace of the neck opening, va'avira dahagisa, and the airspace of the world on the other side of the shoulder strap, umevatale, and it will cancel out the shoulder strap. And now you have no shoulder straps. Now you don't have a beged in the. You don't now, instead of having one beged, you have two separate begadim. You have a beged in the front and a beged in the back, but they're not attached. Certainly, they don't combine to make the shear of a talis. So the Ma'aril says they need to be substantial. What exactly does this mean, that it has to be substantial? So the Machzah Shekel says that this Ma'aril that uses this lashon, Asi Avir Dahagisa, Vavir Dahagisa, he's just borrowing that language from Hilchas Erevin, from Hilchas Mechitzes. But he doesn't mean, literally speaking, that the airspace is going to cancel out the shoulders. It's just his way of saying that they have to be substantial. So if you read inside here in the footnote, Ve'en kavanasai, his intent only is, that they have to be substantial, they have to be very recognizable, so that they should be considered a beged. They should not only be straps. So again, the Machzah Shekel is saying, what does the Ma'aril mean? The Ma'aril means the shoulder sections have to be substantial. You have to look at it, and you have to be able to say that's part of the beged. And that stands in contrast to if you would have straps. Straps are not part of the beged. A strap is just a strap that holds the front and the back together. But it's not a substantial part of the beged. Now the problem with this is that it doesn't really give us, we like to be able to quantify things, right? You want to hear from me, Rabbi Weiss, how big does it have to be? I have a measuring tape, tell me how big it has to be, and then I'll be happy. I don't know what this means. Substantial, insubstantial, I don't know what it means. So they bring down here from the Chazon Ish. Omnam, ha-Chazon Ish kasav lebaris divrei Ma'aril kipshutam. The Chazon Ish understands the words of the Ma'aril more literally. And what he says is like this, V'asher al kain, because the Chazon Ish understands it literally, Hitzrich, he requires sheyushtak seifayim, that the two shoulder sections should be rechavos, they should be wider, minekev beis hatzavar, than the neck opening. What the Chazon Ish says is, you know what the Ma'aril means? The Ma'aril means pshuta kamashmai. The shoulder straps have to be bigger than the neck opening. Because if the shoulder straps are not bigger than the neck opening, if the neck opening is bigger than the shoulder straps, then you have a bigger opening on both sides of the shoulder sections. You have more airspace than the size of the shoulder section. And therefore, it's mevatel, the shoulder section. So how big does the shoulder section have to be? It has to be bigger than the neck opening. So I took this talis katan over here, and I snapped the quick measurement. And what I found is that the shoulder opening is approximately... Oh, camera, focus. Okay, we went out of focus there, but we're back. The shoulder opening is approximately 7.5 inches wide, and the shoulder sections are 8.5 inches wide. I put the tape on my side, so you couldn't see it, but we'll just put it back over here. We'll do a little show and tell. Here we have the shoulder sections are approximately 8.5 inches wide, while the opening is only 7.5 inches wide. Okay. The Siyam HaChazon Ish, the Chazon Ish concludes, I'm reading further in the footnote, Shekeven Shehu Nagea L'Daraisa, since we're talking about a din Daraisa over here, Ein L'Hakel Bazeh. There's no room to be makel. We have to make sure that those shoulder straps are larger than the neck opening. The Chay Kasav B'Kavitz Igarais, and so on and so forth. Okay, now, there is just one other thing I wanted to point out before we go weiter, and that is that we spoke about people who wear very small talis cotton because, for whatever reason, it was difficult for them to wear something that was of proper size. And we spoke about whether or not there's an issue of brachal of atala or not, and it reminded me, we had a very similar issue when it came to Hilchas Daled Minim, Siman Taf Reish Mem Tes Sif Vav in the Mechaber. The Mechaber says by Daled Minim, B'shas Atchak, under pressing circumstances, She'ein Nimtza Kosher, if you can't find kosher or Daled Minim, Kol HaPsulim Noitlin, you would take Daled Minim with any psulim, Vein Mavarchin, and you don't make a bracha. Now, over there, the Mechaber says very clearly you don't make a bracha. But why are you taking Daled Minim if they're puzzle? You're taking Daled Minim if they're puzzle because in the words of the Mishnah Berurah over there, he says, Noitlin afilu b'yam rishain kedei shaloi tishtakach toiras lulav mi Yisrael. You take them so that the mitzvah should not be forgotten. So too over here by tzitzits, if for whatever reason you can't attain a talis cotton of the proper size, you don't cancel out the mitzvah of tzitzits. You still show that you want to be going with tzitzits. And from the Gemara in Menachos it comes out that somebody who wears tzitzits, somebody who's careful to wear tzitzits under any circumstances, he is, in the words of the Gemara, b'shas rischa, at a time of the Rebbeinu Shalom's anger, chas v'chalila, he will be saved. Okay, now let's take a look at the Ramah. So the Mechaber told us what's the share of a talis. It's supposed to be the size that a child, approximately 9 years of age, can cover himself, roishai v'rubai, his head and the majority of his body with that garment. Says the Ramah Haggah, v'oz, and then when you have a beged that size, chayiv b'tzitzits. That's when a gadol would be chayiv to put tzitzits on that garment. So it doesn't have to be big enough for him to be niskase roishai v'rubai. It has to be big enough for this katan to be niskase roishai v'rubai. And then the gadol, if he wants to wear it, has a chiyuv to put tzitzits onto the garment. The dafka kishag, now the Ramah throws in another requirement. The dafka, but this is only true, kishag gadol loivshai pa'amim arai v'yoytza by lashuk. Says the Ramah, when is this true that a beged of that size is chayiv tzitzits? Only if an adult, if a gadol, would wear it sometimes ba'aroi, that sometimes in a pinch a person would throw it on, and he would go out to the shuk wearing this garment. But if it's a garment that a gadol would never step outside his door in, then even if it meets that size requirement, even if it is the size of Kadeshi Iskasei Roisha Verubai of this katan, the Ramah would hold that it is not chayiv. Ice cotton beis in the Mishnah Berurah az chayiv b'tzitzis gadol aloivsha. Then this garment is chayiv b'tzitzis. Not if the katan wears it, the katan is not chayiv. It's chayiv if the gadol wears it, the gadol has a chayiv to put on tzitzis. La'afuke yemein by zeh sharoisha v'rubai. But if the garment does not have this minimum share of roisha v'rubai of the tinoik, then ozla kuli alma potter, then this garment is potter according to everybody. Afilu im agadol gaitza babak kroy l'shuk. Even if a gadol would walk out into the shuk with it, it's still potter since it doesn't have that minimum size. However, im derech anche hamokai, if it is the minig of a place, shagdolim yelchu by bekeva lashuk ve'enon misbaishin, if the minig of a certain locale is that all the gdolim go outside to the street wearing a beged of that size, and they do it all the time, but they're kva, and they're not mavuyish, mashma mediv rabach, the chayiv b'tzitzis. That is mashma from the bach, that it would be chayiv in tzitzits. Ois cut gimel kisha hagadol ben shloishes rishana, when an adult who's at least 13 years old puts on such a beged. Lashuk. Ois cut dalit. What does it mean that he goes out to the street? Says the Chavetz Chaim, doesn't mean that he literally has to walk outside in the street. But he'll open up his door and stand in his doorway, which is open to the street. But if it's such a garment that an adult would be embarrassed to walk out even for a couple of minutes into the shuk wearing such a garment, then like chashiv ksus, it is not considered a beged. Even if he wears it while he is in his house. But, says the Chavetz Chaim, there are those who disagree with this, and they hold, so again, the Ramah added on to the requirement of the Mechaber. The Mechaber said, what's the minimum size? It has to be a beged that a 9-year-old child can cover Rosh V'Rubai with. Then the Ramah came along and the Ramah said, but it has to be that an adult would be willing to wear it outside in the street, at least b'derech haroi, at least to go out in the street for a couple of minutes. Now the Mishnah Berurah says, v'yesh chalkin bazeh, however, there are those who disagree. Usvir lehu, and they hold the loy be'inon rakim yesh by kedei lechases Rosh V'Rubai shel katan. All we need is the Mechaber's minimum size, a Rosh V'Rubai shel katan. And once you have that, it's chayiv. Ve'eskimu ha'achrayim, and the achrayim reach a conclusion, lahachmir, to rule stringently. And what does that mean? Shaloi levarech al talis katan, that you are not to make a bracha on a talis katan. Av sheyesh by kidei Rosh V'Rubai shel katan, even if it has the Mechaber's minimum size of kidei Rosh V'Rubai shel katan. Im hagadol misbayish lotzes by ba'akroi l'shuk. They're machmer like the Ramah, meaning don't make a bracha if a gadol would not go out with this beged ba'akroi to the shuk. You want to make a bracha, you have to make sure that it's a beged that not only has the Mechaber's minimum size, but it has to be a beged that a gadol would be willing to walk out the door of his house in a pinch. Da'afshehu yoytzei, because even if you have somebody who would go out with it, batla daita etzel kol adam, his das is bottled to everybody else. If it's a beged that most people wouldn't go out with, then it's not a beged. Okay, now, what do we do with this lamaisa? What do we do with this practically? So says the Chavetz Chaim, ube'inyan shir Rosh V'Rubai. When it comes to this share of Rosh V'Rubai of a katan, kasav b'sefer priya aretz b'shem sefer der chachma, sheshiuroi shloishes rivei amma ba'orech. We're talking about 3/4 of an amma long, v'chatzi amma b'roichav, and a half of an amma wide. The kasav al zeh machzah shekel v'aretz achayim, but the machzah shekel of the aretz achayim write, she'ein tzvach lazeh min hashas, that there is no source for this measurement from the Gemara. Ubefrat, it's certainly this statement that a half of an amma in the width is Rosh V'Rubai of a 9-year-old. We don't have a source for that from the Gemara, and therefore says the Chavetz Chaim, uminig anshe ma'isa. It is the minig of anshe ma'isa. What are anshe ma'isa? Anshe ma'isa are people who seek to do things the proper way. They seek to perform mitzvahs in the proper way. Uminig anshe ma'isa is the minig of anshe ma'isa. Ledaktek, to take care, sheyir by amma milafanav, the amma mila'acharov, that the tzitzis should be at least an amma in the front and an amma in the back. The neck of beis hatzavar ein oila laminyan, and the neck opening does not count towards this measurement of the amma. Ubetalis katan kazeh, and with the talis katan of this size, yatsa min asveikos, you get out of all of the areas of suffix, v'yachal levarech alav, and you certainly could make a bracha on it. Val kol panim, and at least la yivchais mishloishes rivei amma, you should make sure that it's not less than 3/4 of an amma, ba'orech in length, l'chal tzad, in every direction, the ilavachi, because if it's not at least that size, yesh b'chash bracha levatala, you at least have a chash of a bracha levatala. Ki kasva achrayim, because the achrayim write shemadadu, that they measured the nimtza and they found and concluded sheshir roisha v'ruba shal katan hu ama v'chetzi, that the share of roisha v'ruba of a minor child 9 years old is an amma and a half. So you need at least 3/4 of an amma on one side and at least 3/4 of an amma on the other side. V'ayin b'biur halacha, and he tells us to look at the biur halacha. Okay, so what did the Mishnah Berurah give us here? He gave us that the anshe maisa make sure that their tzitzits are at least an amma milafanav, an amma in the front and an amma in the back. According to Rav Moshe Zecher Tzadik Livracha, an amma is 21.5 inches. I like to round it up to 22 inches. So you want an amma milafanav and an amma mila'achrav. So that means you want 22 wide in the front, 22 wide in the back. Now, how about the length? So really, the length measured from the bottom of the neck opening. Let's grab my talis katan here. Really, the measurement from the bottom of the neck opening over here down to the bottom of the baghead. Stand up for a second. Down to the bottom of the baghead should also be preferably that same 22 inches. Now the talis katan that you see me wearing over here, why is this by show and tell talis katan? Because after I purchased it, I took out my measuring tape and I measured it, and I found that from the bottom of the neck opening to the bottom, it's only 18 inches. Now really that's okay, because 18 is more than 3/4 of 22, so at least 3/4 of an amma I have. Even if it was 16.5 or close to 17, it would be big enough because it's at least 3/4 of an amma. And the Chavetz Chaim said over here that lo yifchais mishloishes rivei amma. You shouldn't go less than 3/4 of an amma. So 3/4 of an amma this talis katan has, but I would prefer to have the full amma. It should be an amma al amma, and therefore I traded it in for a different talis katan that is 22 from the bottom of the neck opening down to the bottom, and it is 22 wide as well. Continues the Chavetz Chaim, and he discusses a minig that at that time was a minig Ashkenaz. Ashkenazim, this that the Germanic people seem to have had a minig. They would take a piece of fabric in the front, and a separate piece of fabric in the back, and then they sewed straps onto them, and then they affixed tzitzits to 2 of the corners in the front and 2 of the corners in the back. You're not yotzin tzitzis with this at all. So this wasn't even one beged. This was 2 different pieces of fabric. You had a square of fabric in the front, a square of fabric in the back, and they stitched on straps. Says the Chavetz Chaim, you're not yotzin the chiva tzitzis at all with this garment. Not only are you being mevatel the mitzvah say of tzitzis, over here he says this would be a bona fide bracha levatala. This is not tzitzits. This is not a talis katan. It's not one beged. It's one piece of cloth in the front with 2 tzitzits hanging on it, and another piece of cloth in the back with 2 tzitzits hanging on it, and neither one of them were big enough to have a share talis, and they don't combine to be mitzvah for a share talis. And Gam also lost his by Shabbos, and he would be forbidden to walk outside with this on Shabbos because it would be haitzah on the tzitzits. The Chamavur b'Siman Yud, the Yud Gimel, ayin sham. V'al panim ha'isakei lo yavarchu aleihen. Certainly, if somebody who puts on azat talis katan should not make a bracha. Eli yavarchu ba'bayker al talis gadol. U'bazeh yelchu kol hayoyim kevit shebechavdim al kol panim bazeh shelo levatal b'tzitzis kol hayoyim. So you want to tell me that you want to wear this so as just not to forget about the mitzvah tzitzits? No. Maybe. But Yezicha not yoitza, and Yezicha can't make a bracha on such tzitzits. Aval kol yirei shamayim lo yismach al zeh klal, But certainly Yirei Shamayim should not rely on such a beged. Elayasa beged mamish, she should make a real one-piece beged. Called Medina Lafim and Hagai, each locale according to its minig. Ube'ezim Mekaymes Naigin, in certain places there are noyig shah beged a nikra camisole, a beged that was called a camisole, a vest or a vest, who pasuach mela acharav, was opened up in the back, v'oisid by tzitzis ba'arba kanfaisav, and therefore they put on tzitzis on 4 of its corners. Imagine a vest. So you're wearing a vest, comes around to the front, and imagine the vest has squared off corners at the bottom. Maybe. Now, usually the vest is closed at the back. But now let's take the back of the vest and let's slit the back of the vest the majority of the way up the back. Well then, at the bottom of that slit, you have another 2 corners. So then you have 2 corners in the front, at the bottom of the front of the vest, and you have 2 corners in the back, at the bottom of the middle slit of the vest. So that's kaiv tzitzis, and you put tzitzis on the 4 corners. And that's a bona fide beged. V'ashrei lahem. So the Chavetz Chaim says, V'ashrei lahem. It's fortunate for them. Why? Because that's a real bona fide beged. That's chayiv and tzitzis. So you have a beged to put tzitzis on. Raksha tzarch lizar sheyeru by pasuach. Just you have to make sure that the slit in the back is open the majority of the way. Because if it's not, then those aren't called conflates in the back. The chebetal's cotton shaisim in Medina Seinu yizaro bazeh. We also have to make sure with our tal's cottons not to zip up the sides. Vayil el sibin Yosef zayin ches mash kasav lusham. Kasav Ari, the Ari writes, talis katan yoiser toiv shalayir by bateis royes. You shouldn't make a talis katan with sleeves. Talis katan is not supposed to have sleeves. Im lavash talis v'nis kapel k'tzas. Let's say you wear your talis and it gets scrunched up. Okay. Kederach loiv shebegadim, in the manner of people who wear clothing. They get scrunched up. V'achar shedis kapel, and after it gets scrunched and folded up, ein boy shear kedelachasis roisha v'rubai. Now it no longer has the shear, because now it's all scrunched up. But if you would pull it apart and flatten it out, it would have the shear. Since ultimately you are going to straighten it out, it's as if it was already straightened out. If you have a beged that had the shear, the minimum shear, a roisha v'rubai of a tinok, but then you folded it over and you stitched it, so you actually sewed the beged to make it smaller, potter mitzitzis, that is potter. Shab siman v'chein kasav balekat hakamach. Okay, a very interesting siman. Now we have a better insight into the proper size of tzitzits. Thank you so much for joining me for Leaving HaTorah. Discuss of Leaving HaTorah should be begging against Klal Yisrael. The Baruch Shem should send Yeshua for us, Parnasset should do to all those in need, and we should be zeicher to see the B'yazka al Tzedek b'meherav yameinu. Amen. Be well.